My parents mocked me for being the dumb one. A $47 million check proved them wrong. It still feels unreal to say it, to even think it, that number. $47 million. It wasn't just a number on a bank statement. It was a mic drop. A mic drop so loud it echoed through every room in that sprawling estate, through every carefully curated memory, through every condescending glance I'd endured for as long as I could remember. For years, I was the afterthought, the fuzzy background character in my own family's meticulously staged drama. While my older brother Mark was being groomed to take over Dad's empire, some nebulous but incredibly lucrative real estate development company, and my younger sister Emily was perfecting her debutante charm for society galas, I was just there, the easy one, the one who couldn't grasp complex financial reports, who struggled with the nuances of the stock market, who, in their eyes, simply didn't possess the sharp intellect required to be a true Harrison. Growing up in Potomac, the sprawling elegance of our home was a constant, subtle reminder of this hierarchy. Acres of manicured lawns, a circular driveway that could accommodate 20 cars without breaking a sweat, and a marble entryway so grand it felt like stepping into a museum. Every holiday, every birthday, every casual Sunday dinner was a performance. Mom, always impeccably dressed, would orchestrate conversations around Mark's latest business triumph or Emily's upcoming social season. Dad, a man of few words but immense authority, would offer approving nods, his gaze often skipping over me as if I were a smudge on his polished vision. I tried, I really did. I'd pore over the annual reports Dad would occasionally shove in my direction, the spreadsheets that swam before my eyes like abstract art. I'd feign interest in the intricacies of zoning laws and the projected ROI on new luxury condo developments. But the more I tried to fit their mold, the more I seemed to falter. I'd ask what felt like legitimate questions, and they'd be met with patient but thinly veiled sighs. "Sweetie," Mom would say, her voice dripping with a saccharine sympathy, "that's a bit too complicated for you, isn't it?" Or Dad, with a dismissive wave, "Don't worry your pretty little head about it. Mark's got it handled." The worst was the nickname, the dumb one. It wasn't shouted, not usually. It was whispered, passed between my parents and their equally affluent friends at cocktail parties, usually while I was within earshot, pretending to be engrossed in a book or a conversation with the help. Sometimes Emily would use it too, a little smirk playing on her lips as she'd point out my latest perceived blunder. "Oh, Sarah, you really are the dumb one, aren't you?" she'd chirp, a genuine amusement in her tone. It was meant to be affectionate, I suppose, in their twisted, competitive way, but it burrowed under my skin, a constant hum of inadequacy. I developed a thick skin, or so I told myself. I retreated into my own world. I found solace in art, in literature, in long walks through the estate's private woods. I learned to be invisible, to observe without being seen, to listen without being heard. I became a master of polite smiles and agreeable nods, all the while a quiet resentment simmered beneath the surface. They thought I was content with my lot, happy to be that creative one, the one who didn't need to bear the burden of legacy. They mistook my silence for acceptance. The real turning point, though, wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic argument. It was subtler, a slow unraveling of my parents' carefully constructed image of me. It happened around my 30th birthday. I'd always downplayed my own career aspirations, telling them I was happy working part-time at a local gallery, that the reduced hours allowed me flexibility. The truth was, I was building something small, something private, something that didn't require their approval or their capital. I'd inherited a modest sum from my grandmother, my other grandmother, the one who actually saw me, the one who didn't care about stock portfolios, and I'd invested it. Wisely, it turned out. I'd spent years quietly cultivating relationships with artists, learning about emerging markets, and spotting trends before they hit the mainstream. I'd taken online courses, read every book I could find, and attended countless art fairs, always on my own dime, always alone. I started a small online consultancy, helping private collectors acquire pieces. It was a niche market, not flashy, not something Dad would ever deign to understand. But it was mine, and it was growing. The humiliation really peaked during Thanksgiving that year. Mark had just closed a massive deal,
Dad was beaming, and Emily was gushing about her fiancé, a young lawyer from a prominent family. Mom, as usual, steered the conversation towards us, the children. She was talking about their futures, their legacies. Then she turned to me. "And what are your plans, Sarah?" she asked, her voice a little too loud, a little too pointed. I smiled, a practiced, placid smile. "Oh, you know, Mom, just enjoying the gallery and my little art projects." Emily snorted. "Little art projects. That's cute. Still painting little watercolors, are we?" Mark, bless his oblivious heart, tried to smooth things over. "Sarah's got a good eye, Mom. She's helped me with a few pieces for the office." "A good eye for pretty pictures is hardly a career, Mark," Dad interjected, his voice flat. He was looking at his wine glass, swirling the dark liquid as if it held the secrets of the universe. "We're talking about building something tangible, Sarah, something that lasts, something that means something in the world." He finally looked up, and his gaze, though not overtly cruel, was laced with a weary disappointment that stung more than any insult. "You've always been a bit flighty, easily distracted. We just worry about you." The word flighty hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the polite way of saying incapable. My cheeks burned. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to shrink away, to disappear. I wanted to scream, to tell them about the deals I was brokering, the clients I was advising, the steady stream of income I was generating. But the words caught in my throat. They wouldn't believe me. They'd just dismiss it as more of my fanciful notions, another one of Sarah's little games. I remember excusing myself shortly after, claiming a headache. I walked out onto the patio, the crisp November air a welcome shock against my flesh skin. The manicured gardens, usually a source of comfort, felt like a gilded cage. I watched the fairy lights twinkle on the trees, each one a tiny, mocking reminder of the superficial beauty of my life. I sat on a cold stone bench, the silence of the night amplifying the noise in my head.
That's when the resolve truly hardened. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore, not entirely. It was about finally claiming my own power, a power they had systematically denied me. The legal documents arrived a few weeks later, on a dreary Tuesday morning. I almost didn't open the thick, cream-colored envelope. It was from the estate lawyers handling my grandmother's affairs. I assumed it was just a final accounting, a formality. But as I unfolded the pages, my hands began to shake. It wasn't a simple accounting. It was a testament. My grandmother, bless her foresight and her quiet wisdom, had been watching. She had seen my parents' ingrained favoritism, their dismissive attitude towards me, and she had done something about it. She had established a trust, a significant one. It was structured in a way that was deliberately complex, designed to bypass my parents' direct control. The terms were intricate, tied to specific investment milestones and performance metrics. For years, the capital had been growing, managed by a team of independent advisors she had personally selected. They were tasked with nurturing the fund, with ensuring it was used for its intended purpose, my financial independence and the development of my entrepreneurial endeavors. As I read the numbers, the carefully itemized assets, the projected growth dividends, I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. The gallery, my consultancy, even the little cottage I'd bought in the Berkshires, they were all investments, yes, but they were also personal passions. My grandmother hadn't just been giving me money. She'd been endorsing my path, validating my choices in a way my own parents never had. The trust wasn't just a financial windfall, it was a legacy of belief, and its value, even before the recent surge in my own portfolio, was substantial. The initial valuation, a decade ago, had been in the millions. Now, after years of shrewd management and a booming art market, the figure was staggering. My eyes scanned the final pages, the summary of current market value, $47 million. The room spun. The paper slipped from my numb fingers and scattered across the polished hardwood floor of my modest apartment. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, meticulously planned act of financial empowerment. My grandmother, who had always been the quiet observer in our family's loud affairs, had orchestrated this. She had seen the subtle ways my parents had tried to keep me small, the way they'd dismissed my potential, and she had created a safety net, a launchel pad, a weapon. I sank onto the floor, the cool wood against my bare legs. The silence in my apartment, usually a comforting blanket, now felt charged with a new, electrifying energy. I thought of my parents, their smug certainty, their casual condescension. I thought of Emily's pitying smiles
and Mark's well-meaning but ultimately dismissive acknowledgments. They had built their lives on a foundation of perceived superiority, on the unspoken belief that I was somehow lesser. And now, through an act of love from a woman they barely acknowledged, that foundation was about to crumble. I wasn't the dumb one. I was the one they had underestimated, the one they had consistently overlooked. And that, I realized with a slow, building thrill, was the greatest advantage of all. The first domino had fallen. The carefully constructed world of the Harrisons was about to face a reckoning.
The legal documents lay scattered on the floor, a testament to a truth that felt more potent, more visceral than any physical blow. $47 million. It wasn't just a number, it was a declaration of independence, a silent scream against years of being labeled the dumb one. My hands, which had always trembled when Dad handed me a quarterly report, now felt steady, almost unnaturally so. A cold, hard resolve had settled deep within my bones, replacing the gnawing insecurity that had been my constant companion. They saw me as a decorative piece, a pretty, unintelligent accessory to their grand design. They never imagined I'd have a voice, let alone the means to wield it. I gathered the papers, my movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. The lawyer's contact information was stark and official. I picked up my phone, the screen's brightness feeling like a spotlight in the dim afternoon. Dialing the number felt like stepping off a cliff, a plunge into the unknown, but also, finally, a step into my own power. I didn't want to confront them yet, not directly. They deserved to feel the ground shift beneath them, to experience the disorientation of their carefully controlled reality unraveling from the edges. My grandmother, bless her soul, had given me the tools. Now it was time to use them. The conversation with the estate lawyers was surprisingly straightforward. They confirmed the trust's validity, its current valuation, and the independent advisory board's diligent management. They explained the stipulations, the progressive release of funds tied to achieving certain business milestones, a subtle nod to my grandmother's understanding of my parents' need for tangible results, even if those results were now entirely mine. It was all there, laid out in black and white. A substantial portion was immediately accessible, a significant chunk held in reserve, and a substantial portion earmarked for further investment in my own ventures, provided I met the established growth targets. They were surprisingly impressed with my existing art consultancy's performance, noting its steady organic growth as a testament to my acumen. This validation, coming from objective professionals, felt like a balm on old wounds. The immediate liquidity was key, not for extravagant purchases, not for flaunting, but for leverage, for setting the stage. I knew my parents' greatest fear wasn't losing money, it was losing control, losing face. They thrived on projecting an image of unassailable success, of a family dynasty built on shrewd business sense and unimpeachable social standing. My perceived incompetence was a necessary prop in that illusion. If I, the dumb one, could achieve this kind of financial independence, it would shatter their carefully crafted narrative. My first move wasn't flashy. It was strategic. I contacted my grandmother's lead estate lawyer and asked for a formal meeting. I requested that he draft a preliminary proposal for the immediate release of a portion of the trust funds, not for personal use, but to acquire a significant stake in a promising but undervalued tech startup. I had been quietly following this company for months, recognizing its innovative potential long before anyone else in my circles had even heard its name. It was a calculated risk, one that would require a substantial investment, but one that promised a substantial return.
I wanted to present this not as a whim, but as a sound business decision, backed by research and foresight. The meeting with my parents was scheduled for the following Sunday. It was a deliberate choice, a return to the scene of so many of my childhood humiliations, Sunday dinner. The air in the Harrison dining room always felt thick with unspoken expectations and subtle judgments. This time, however, I walked in with a different kind of armor. I wore a simple, elegant dress, not ostentatious, but understatedly expensive, a quiet statement of my own refined taste. I wasn't trying to compete with Mom's designer ensembles, but I wasn't going to look like a charity case either. The usual pleasantries felt hollow. Mark, bless him, was still the affable older brother, recounting his latest golf game. Emily, already honing her skills as a social climber, was chattering about a charity gala she was co-chairing. Dad was his usual taciturn self, his gaze sweeping over us all with that familiar, assessing glint. Mom, however, seemed to sense a shift. Her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even apprehension dancing in their depths. "So, Sarah," Mom began, her voice carefully modulated, "still enjoying the gallery life? I saw a rather lovely piece in Architectural Digest the other day, reminded me of that abstract artist you were so fond of." It was the usual patronizing pat on the head, disguised as polite inquiry. I met her gaze directly, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "Actually, Mom, my art consultancy has been doing exceptionally well. We've just finalized a major acquisition for a private collector in Miami, a significant piece by a contemporary sculptor. It's been quite lucrative." The word lucrative hung in the air, a subtle ripple in the otherwise smooth surface of their comfortable conversation. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mark looked up, surprised. Emily's smile faltered for a split second. "Miami?" Dad finally grunted, his voice laced with mild suspicion. "What kind of collector?" "A discerning one," I replied, my tone even. "Someone who appreciates art for its intrinsic value and its investment potential. And speaking of investment potential," I continued, turning my attention to him, "I've been exploring some new opportunities that I believe align perfectly with the Harrison legacy of forward-thinking enterprise." The shift in the room was palpable. The casual atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden, charged silence. Dad set his fork down with a soft clink. Mom leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped on the table. "Opportunities?" Dad's voice was low, a rumble of suppressed interest. "What kind of opportunities?" "I've been working with my grandmother's estate lawyers," I began, letting the words sink in. The mention of her name, the one they rarely acknowledged unless it suited them, seemed to land with a surprising weight. It seemed she had a rather comprehensive plan for my financial future, a plan that involved significant capital and a trust managed independently, with provisions for entrepreneurial development. Emily let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "A trust? Sarah, that's nice. A little nest egg, right?" I ignored her, my focus fixed on my father. "It's more than a nest egg, Emily. It's substantial."
And my grandmother, God rest her soul, clearly had more faith in my capabilities than certain other people in this room. The barb was sharp, deliberate, and I saw it land. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mom's expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, a mix of shock and dawning realization. "My grandmother's trust," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "has provided me with the resources to pursue ventures that I believe have incredible growth potential. I've been analyzing the market, and I've identified a promising tech startup. I've drafted a proposal, a comprehensive business plan to acquire a significant equity stake. I've presented it to the Trust's advisory board, and they've approved the initial capital allocation, contingent on my presentation to the family." I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound binder. It wasn't just a few printouts. It was a professionally designed document, complete with market analysis, financial projections, and a detailed breakdown of the target company's disruptive technology. I placed it on the table, sliding it towards my father. "I'd like you to review this," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I believe it demonstrates not only a sound investment strategy, but also a significant potential return. A return that I believe would impress even your most demanding shareholders, Dad." He picked up the binder, his large hands turning the pages slowly. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint crinkle of paper. Mark leaned over, intrigued. Emily looked visibly unnerved, her usual chipper demeanor replaced by a forced pleasantness. "Tech startup?" Dad finally mused, his voice lacking its usual dismissive edge. "What sector?" "Disruptive AI for supply chain optimization," I replied without hesitation. "Their algorithms are proprietary, incredibly efficient, and have already shown a significant reduction in costs for their beta clients. The market is ripe for this kind of innovation, and their leadership team is exceptional." He continued to flip through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sheer professionalism of the document, the depth of the research, the articulate presentation of complex information, it was all clearly catching him off guard. He looked up, his gaze finally meeting mine, and for the first time I saw not just disappointment or dismissal, but a grudging curiosity, perhaps even a flicker of respect. "This is thorough," he admitted, the word a concession he rarely made. "You did all this yourself?" "With the guidance of my grandmother's advisors, yes," I confirmed.
But the strategy, the research, the identification of the opportunity, that was mine. Mom finally spoke, her voice surprisingly soft. Sarah, this is unexpected. We had no idea you were pursuing such ambitious projects. Perhaps, I said, meeting her gaze, you weren't looking hard enough. Or perhaps you were simply unwilling to see what didn't fit your preconceived notions. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken truths. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mark, ever the peacemaker, attempted a lighthearted comment. Well, Sarah, looks like you've been busy playing catch-up. Nice work. But the attempt at normalcy fell flat. The veneer had been cracked.
The carefully constructed edifice of their family hierarchy had just been subjected to a seismic tremor. The matriarch, the quiet observer, had left behind a legacy that was not only of wealth, but of validation. A validation that had bypassed the very people who had spent years trying to define and diminish me. The tension in the room was a coiled spring, ready to snap. Dad closed the binder, his expression unreadable. We'll discuss this further, he stated, his voice flat, a clear sign that the conversation was over for now. But the undercurrents had shifted. The comfortable dominance he had always exerted felt a little less secure. The casual condescension was now tinged with a nascent unease. As I left their sprawling estate that evening, the same drive that had always felt like a prelude to judgment now felt like an escape route. The fairy lights twinkling in the trees no longer mocked me. They seemed to illuminate the path ahead. I hadn't revealed the full extent of my grandmother's bequest, of course. The $47 million was still my secret weapon, my ace in the hole. This was just the opening salvo. The following weeks were a delicate dance. I continued my work, projecting an air of quiet confidence. I met with the tech startup CEO, cementing our partnership. I finalized the trust's investment strategy with the advisory board, ensuring the capital was deployed efficiently and effectively. I let my parents stew in their uncertainty, allowing the seeds of doubt to take root. They knew I had financial resources. They knew I was making business moves, but they didn't know the scale, the depth, the sheer audacity of my grandmother's plan. The real escalation came during a carefully orchestrated event. Mom was hosting her annual garden party, a staple of the Potomac social scene, a glittering affair attended by the movers and shakers of the community. It was the perfect stage for a grand unveiling. I hadn't attended in years, always feigning a prior engagement or a bout of artistic introspection. This year, however, I RSVP'd with a resounding yes. I arrived fashionably late, as expected, the murmur of conversation pausing momentarily as I entered the manicured grounds. Mom rushed over, her smile a little too bright, a little too strained. "Sarah, darling, you made it! We were so hoping you would." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mom," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. I surveyed the scene. My father schmoozing with a group of investors, Mark circulating with his usual affability, Emily already surrounded by a gaggle of admirers, dissecting the latest society gossip. They all looked as they always did, confident, assured, perched atop their social and financial mountain. I spent the first hour mingling, engaging in polite conversation, letting them all observe me. I was gracious, poised, the picture of effortless success. Then, at the precise moment when the champagne was flowing and the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the meticulously kept gardens, I made my move. I found my father surrounded by a cluster of his peers, discussing a new development project. I waited for a lull in their conversation, then I approached, a gentle smile on my face. "Dad," I said, my voice carrying just enough to draw their attention, "I wanted to share some news. It's rather significant, and I thought you'd be particularly interested, given your expertise in real estate development." He turned, a polite but dismissive expression on his face. "What is it, Sarah?" "Well," I began, my gaze sweeping over the assembled group, "you know how I've been exploring investment opportunities outside of the art world? Thanks to my grandmother's incredible foresight, I've been able to pursue ventures with substantial potential." I paused, letting the implication sink in. "Specifically, I recently finalized a significant investment in a disruptive tech company. They're revolutionizing supply chain logistics with AI. It's a game changer." I saw my father's eyes narrow slightly. The other men, however, leaned in, their curiosity piqued. They were all in business, all looking for the next big thing. "Impressive," one of the investors, a man named Mr. Sterling, commented. "What kind of returns are they projecting?"
This was it, the moment to drop the bomb. I turned to my father, my smile widening. The projections are, frankly, astounding. The advisory board overseeing my grandmother's trust has approved a capital allocation that will give me a substantial equity stake. Based on their current valuation and projected growth, my initial investment is estimated to be worth upwards of $50 million within the next 18 months. The air crackled. 50 million. The number, spoken casually in the midst of a garden party, landed like a grenade. My father's face, usually so impassive, contorted with disbelief. Mr. Sterling's jaw dropped. The other men exchanged stunned glances. 50 million? Mr. Sterling stammered. From a single investment? And this is your capital? I met my father's gaze, my own eyes steady and unwavering. Not just my capital, Mr. Sterling. It's a portion of the trust my grandmother established for me, a trust that, in its entirety, is valued at nearly double that amount, 47 million to be precise, and growing. The silence that followed was absolute, a void where the polite chatter and the clinking of glasses had been moments before. My mother appeared at my side, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Emily, who had drifted closer, looking for gossip, now stood frozen, her perfectly composed facade shattered. Mark, his smile gone, stared at me with an expression of utter astonishment. My father's voice, when it finally came, was a low growl. 47 million? Sarah, what in God's name are you talking about? I turned to face them all, the setting sun casting long shadows behind me, illuminating the shock and dawning horror on their faces. I'm talking about my inheritance, Dad. The inheritance my grandmother left me. The inheritance you both seemed so convinced I was incapable of managing. The inheritance that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I am far more than just the dumb one. The carefully constructed world of the Harrisons was imploding around them, and I stood at the epicenter, the quiet storm they had created, finally unleashed. The power shift wasn't just beginning, it had arrived, and it was devastating. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the bitter taste of long-denied truths, and the terrifying realization that the daughter they had dismissed was now in a position to redefine their entire legacy. The game had changed, and they had no idea how to play. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the bitter taste of long-denied truths, and the terrifying realization that the daughter they had dismissed was now in a position to redefine their entire legacy. The game had changed, and they had no idea how to play. My mother, her face a mask of disbelief, finally found her voice, a choked whisper. Sarah, how could you keep this from us? I looked at her, at the carefully applied makeup that suddenly seemed to emphasize the lines of her fear. Keep it from you? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing around me. You never asked. Or rather, you asked the questions you wanted answers to, the ones that fit your narrative. You never bothered to look deeper. My grandmother always believed in providing for her family, but she also believed in fairness, and she knew that sometimes the quietest ones have the loudest strategies. My father finally managed to speak, his voice rough, strained. The trust, it's not all yours, is it? There are provisions, conditions. Your grandmother wasn't foolish enough to hand over everything without safeguards. A small smile touched my lips. Oh, Dad, she was many things, but she was never foolish. She understood the nature of your ambition, of your need for control. That's why she structured it the way she did. The funds are allocated progressively, tied to business growth, to demonstrable success. She wanted me to build something, to prove myself. And I have. I gestured around me to the horrified faces of my family. This is the beginning of that proof. The $50 million investment? That's just the first phase. There are other ventures already in the pipeline. Real estate, renewable energy, things you've only ever discussed in boardrooms, but never actually committed to in a meaningful way. My grandmother's trust is not just a financial safety net, it's a launchpad. Emily, recovering slightly, stepped forward, her usual sharp wit attempting to reassert itself. Launchpad for what, Sarah? For showing us up? For making us look incompetent? For proving I'm not, I replied, my gaze locking with hers. For proving that intelligence isn't always loud and capability isn't always visible to those who refuse to see. My grandmother's lawyers confirmed it all, every clause, every stipulation. She even set up an independent board, men and women of unimpeachable integrity who oversee the trust. They don't answer to you. They answer to the trust charter and to me, and they've been nothing but impressed with my unconventional approach. My father stood taller, his face hardening, the momentary flicker of shock giving way to a familiar defiance. Unconventional or reckless? You're talking about millions, Sarah. Tens of millions. This isn't a game of Monopoly. I'm well aware of that, Dad, I said, my voice unwavering. But it seems you've underestimated the value of foresight. My grandmother didn't just leave me money, she left me a roadmap to financial independence, to strategic growth, and to a certain degree of leverage. The word leverage hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Mark, who had been silent, his eyes darting between me and our parents, finally spoke. Leverage? What do you mean, leverage? I turned to him, my expression softening slightly. Mark, you've always been the good son, the one who tried to keep the peace.
You've probably seen how things really are, behind the polished facade. How Dad's decisions sometimes impact more than just the bottom line. How Mom's social maneuvering is as much about status as it is about connection. I paused, letting him absorb that. My grandmother's trust has provisions, you see, not just for me, but for certain familial considerations. Provisions that can be enacted if specific financial or ethical benchmarks are not met by the primary beneficiaries. My father stepped forward, his voice dangerously low. What are you implying, Sarah? I'm not implying anything, Dad, I said, my gaze steady. I'm stating facts. My grandmother was a shrewd woman. She knew that wealth could be a tool, not just for accumulation, but for influence. And sometimes influence is best exerted when there's a clear consequence for an action, or for less than honorable action. My mother let out a whimper. Sarah, you can't possibly be threatening us. We're your family. And what have you done with your family, Mom? I asked, my voice laced with a weariness that was years in the making. You've treated me like a child who needs constant supervision, like a pretty ornament that shouldn't be allowed to touch anything important. You've built this empire on appearances, and you've forgotten what truly matters. My grandmother didn't. She saw the potential in me, the strength, and she wanted to ensure that strength had the resources to flourish. Mr. Sterling, the investor who had been so impressed, cleared his throat. Forgive me, but this is becoming rather personal. If the $50 million is indeed allocated for this investment, and the trust is as substantial as you say, then perhaps we should continue this discussion in a more private setting. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. Absolutely, Mr. Sterling. My apologies. The emotional undertones of this family can sometimes be overwhelming. I turned back to my father, a final chilling smile playing on my lips. I believe we have much to discuss, Dad, about the future of Harrison Enterprises, and perhaps about the definition of true legacy, my grandmother's legacy specifically, and how I intend to honor it, by building something even greater. The sun had almost set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawn. The other guests, sensing the palpable tension, had discreetly retreated, leaving us in a small, isolated circle of disbelief and dawning fear. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of resentment and misjudgment. I looked at my parents, their faces etched with a confusion and fear that was a mirror of my own past. They had spent so long dictating my worth, defining me by what they perceived as my limitations, that they had never considered the possibility of my exceeding them. My grandmother, in her quiet wisdom, had provided the ultimate equalizer. I've arranged for a follow-up meeting with the board next week, I continued, my voice steady and businesslike, a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom I had unleashed. We'll be finalizing the acquisition of the AI firm and discussing expansion into the Asian markets. I'll need your input on some of the logistical challenges, Dad. Your experience might be surprisingly relevant. He stared at me, speechless. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted.
The father who had always held the reins, who had always dictated the terms, was now being asked for input by his daughter, the daughter he had deemed incapable of handling a checkbook. As I walked away, leaving them standing in the fading light, I felt a profound sense of quiet, not emptiness, but a space cleared of the constant noise of their expectations, of their judgments. The victory wasn't loud or boisterous. It was a deep, resonating hum of self-possession. The humiliation of the past, the years of feeling invisible, of being underestimated,
It had all been transmuted into a formidable strength. My grandmother's trust wasn't just about money, it was about liberation, and I was finally, truly free. The road ahead was long, no doubt, but for the first time in my life, it was mine to navigate, with the full weight of my grandmother's wisdom and her formidable fortune at my back. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation, and it felt like the most powerful exhale I had ever taken.